Well, welcome to week 10, deep dive, knowing Jesus.
A quarter of the way. Oh, so, yeah, we're really a quarter of the way through.
Quarter of the way through. So a year-ish.
We're a year-ish in,
into his life.
Into his life. When he calls Levi, just a little over a year kind of in there, 15 months with calling of the disciples, naming them.
Yeah.
Of his public ministry from his baptism.
Yeah, and then a quarter of the way through our journey. That's, a 40-week thing. Apologize. It is raining, so...
If you hear extra noise,
that's what
the storm front's coming.
That's what it is. It's here. Yes, it's here. Yeah. So anyway, we are looking at this allegiance encounter. We've kind of, we spent some time his preparation for ministry, and then we've looked at a few different encounters that Jesus has had with people.
And this is really kind of something I've been doing some studying with different people. Charles Kraft is one, but some other kind of missiologist people who study discipleship, and they talk about our various ways we relate to Jesus, and you do see this. I mean, I think actually I've added one in here that some of them they don't, because always have to make something a little your own. But that truth, we have to know Jesus as truth. Mm-hmm. We have to have some understanding of who he is. We have to have a heart relationship. Like any relationship, you can't draw near unless there's a heart grace encounter, the power encounter. Mm-hmm. I think, you look really around the world, I mean, probably outside of North America more, one of the first ways they encounter Jesus is they see the power of Jesus at work in people's lives. We miss that often here. And then a forgiveness encounter. This is the one I've added, that I think at some point we have to realize he is Savior. He's more than just truth. He's more than a teacher. He's more than just a loving God friend. He is our Savior and forgiver, and you have to get to there. And then at some point, those things don't mean anything as much until you say, okay, I'm all in. Yeah. I'm alive. I'm committed. Yeah,
and I think that's a great way to look at the different ways that Jesus encounters people, because there's a book written by Robert Peterson. It's called Salvation Accomplished by the Son. And in it, he kind of outlines different saving works and saving pictures of who Jesus is, goes through some different metaphors even for how we understand the work of Christ and how that relates to salvation. But I think the same is true when we see Jesus interacting with people. We see different parts of who he is and what he is offering. And the response, in each one of those encounters, his invitation is some sort of response. And I think that's especially highlighted in the encounter we're going to look at.
Yes, very much. Yeah, it's the immediacy, the totality, the cost of the encounter that's there. And we see, I think a foil to Levi is just the rich young ruler who Jesus really, says, what must I do to have eternal life? Is heart hungry for something, and Jesus says, sell it all and follow me, and he can't do it. He goes away sad. And Levi, who is, I think kind of a rich young man, he may not be a ruler, he may not have had other powerful opportunity, but he certainly had controlling power over money and stuff.
Yeah, so we're going to be in Luke chapter 5. We're going to look at the call of Levi, and then specifically look at a few, the other 12, the other disciples, and they were all called, I think, from different places, but the call was the same, come follow me, and maybe kind of look at what we know or what we can know about, some of them as well. So in Luke chapter 5, we have Jesus. So he's still in Capernaum, and he says he went out, he saw a tax collector named Levi. Now, in other accounts, we see Levi is named Matthew. Yeah. So why the difference there?
It's hard to know. Is Matthew a name that Jesus gave, like he gave, Peter to Simon? Abraham was God's name to Abraham. Or Abram. I'm not sure. It doesn't say Jesus gave him that name. Was one a nickname? Did he, have more of a Roman name, perhaps? Although these are both kind of Hebrew names. Yeah. That's what I would tend to think. This is, what Jesus sees. I do think there's something in the meaning. Levi is attached, and his name means attached. So as a tax collector, he's attached to money. Levi has made his allegiances in Romans, which is, I just think it's a marvelous play, the calling of Levi, who was attached and committed to one thing. And he's then Matthew, which means gift of God, and that probably no one had ever seen him as a gift. You know, what gift do you have? Like Levi, everybody hated him, spit on him. He was unclean. He was like a pig. You know, everything. And Jesus comes along. That's what I love. It's anybody, you know, everybody who's rejected, Jesus sees as a gift.
Yeah.
That's powerful to me.
So he's described here as tax collector, and we see in other accounts Jesus being described as a friend of sinners, a friend of tax collectors. This vocation of being a tax collector is kind of, it's highlighted here specifically. We don't really have, I think, the context and you know.
Yeah, I mean, the IRS are good people generally. You know, we pay our taxes. We pay our taxes, and you know, we believe we get something from it. I mean, we pay our taxes, and there's, you know, there's education, there's roads, there's governmental systems, you know, there's other things that we get.
If nothing else, we can see and find records. We can see, you know, look at the legislation and see the plans for how the tax is used.
Right,
if you make a certain amount, you can expect to pay this percentage. Yeah.
So it's very different because the Romans would come in contract with people. They'd hire local people because you're harder to say no to a friend. And so Levi would say, I'm going to give you, let's just say, you know, $50,000 in taxes this year. He would pledge that. Then he could charge as much as he wanted to, basically, and get tax money. Whatever he got over and above, he could keep. And we see this a little bit more with Zacchaeus, where, you know, he pays back, right, 4 times what he took. Well, why would he pay that? You know, look, why would he do it? It's, well, because he extorted. They paid 4 or 5 or 6 times the taxes of what they should. So people hated them.
Yeah, they had a reputation.
Right, of just, you know, ripping people off, more attached to money than caring about people. And, you know, the Romans would hire guards, and they'd stand there and they'd break your leg if you didn't pay taxes.
It's perhaps worse because they're hiring local people, so it's like your own countryman is ripping you off, and you know it.
And that's why they were so despised, is because they really had sold their soul to a pagan governor, and were, you know, their taxes were supporting pagan religion, and their, you know, another country and nation was getting rich off of them. And so, which is why the Talmud surprisingly said you could lie. It was actually, the priest would say, you can lie to a tax collector, and it's not breaking the 10 Commandments.
Wow.
Which is like, okay, I mean, which obviously probably why would you lie? It's to, you know, pay as little taxes which you can.
Yeah.
So it was just seedy side, and people just had all sorts of things, and a visceral response to a tax collector.
So Jesus, he comes across Levi, and we don't know the nature of the relationship. We don't know if Jesus had been, like, if Levi had been around him a lot, if they had other conversations, if Jesus's reputation had just...
Yeah, and I'm assuming a smallish town, Capernaum, you know, miracles were happening. The paralytic was there, you know, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, their lives have been turned upside down. I can't imagine that Levi would have had no interest or no knowledge of who Jesus was. Maybe was intrigued or interested, you know, had heard something, but probably never thought this rabbi is never going to have anything to do with me. And maybe he felt trapped, you know, like maybe he wanted out, but where does a tax collector go?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and I think that's one of the things that makes this allegiance encounter, this invitation that Jesus extends to Levi so much more astonishing, is that you know, Levi is very isolated, probably. You know, he's already pledged his allegiance. He's pledged his allegiance to Rome. He's pledged his allegiance to himself, right? He's out.
And even probably his family would be against him, perhaps. You know, no, like you've made your bed and you're lying in that, whether you like it or now or not. It might have been, oh, I'm going to get rich, but after a while that wears off if you don't have friends. Yeah,
and not to go full pastoral, but like, I mean, that's what Jesus does for us, right? Like, it doesn't matter your situation. Jesus, the invitation is still there.
Still there,
Jesus
very
is
much.
Still offering that. So anyway, it's fascinating. So Levi, he's sitting there, and Jesus says to him, "Follow me." Now, we went through the Covered in Dust series for like a year ago, and it seems like that expression, "follow me," has a particular function.
A technical term, it was what a rabbi would say to a potential disciple student who would want to apprentice under a rabbi to become a rabbi. So young boys in particular would go through a series of school. If they could continue on and do well, they get to a point, which I think we talked, maybe about the time that Jesus was around at the temple, they would kind of interview Q&A with rabbis that they really wanted to connect and ally themselves with. And, they would interview, and if the rabbi would either send them home and say, hope you have a baby that can be a rabbi, brutal. Or follow me, which is what Jesus says to many of these disciples. And so it is like, become a student, become a disciple. And who knows, I just wonder how many of the disciples had actually wanted to be rabbis when they were younger, and maybe some rabbi had said, you go home, have a baby, pray that they become a rabbi. And so who knows what kind of rejection even Levi had experienced to this point that even led him to be a tax collector. So Jesus come and, it's follow me. It's like an invitation into, I am going to call you to be a disciple who is going to make a disciple later on.
Which I think is also just another fascinating layer as we get into, the fuller description of who the disciples are, is that like Jesus isn't going and picking from the Jewish leaders who have gone through the training. No. He's finding people where they are, and he's molding them through teaching, through a ministry of presence, through correction, through empowering and equipping, all of these things. And again, Jesus does that for us as well.
Right. As ordinary people, he picks us out of our brokenness, not of our strengths or successes. It's really, pretty powerful to see.
So we see here then in verse 28, it says, leaving everything. So I love that you already referenced the rich young ruler, because it's almost a contrast here of what the rich young ruler is not willing to do, at least from what we can discern from what we have available, and then what Levi was willing to do. He left everything.
Jesus doesn't say, give me 30 days, give me a week, we'll give you a test trial, you get your money back if you don't like it. This was a major decision. Said the other disciples could go back to their fishing boats. Levi couldn't. This is a once big time commitment. He's got nothing really to go back to. And probably as a tax collector, even a year later, he's got nothing really to go back to. He can't go back to Rome, be a tax collector. He probably can't go back to his community because they're already isolated him. So.
And he doesn't know, right? In this moment, he doesn't have the foresight to fully understand what following Jesus is going to entail. He doesn't know that 2 years from this point, Jesus is going to die. He just makes a decision to follow him.
Yeah, and I think within there is the assumption that it's not like, well, I'm just going to follow Jesus the rest of my life. It's like, I'm going to follow him, and I'm going to carry on this movement. I'm going to do something with it. I'm going to eventually, if you use the technical term, follow me, I'm eventually going to have disciples of my own and train up. But I'm really, entering into kind of this whole new lifestyle for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's good. Well, in Luke 6, right, so a little bit further, we see him calling 12 disciples, right? Like there's this formal list, I guess, of who. So from the vast number of people who have been
probably at least 70. We know 70. There were 120 by the time you get to the upper room. Now Jesus still has 2 more years of ministry basically from this point on. But probably by this time, close to 70 who are there. And so he's picking 12, who are going to be also apostles, which means sent ones. Those who are going to really carry on the ministry, I think, once he's gone and carry on the movement. So, and you see a shift at this moment in Jesus now beginning to more intentionally just walk with them and show these guys some things.
And I'm glad you brought that up. So we use a lot of times the word disciple and apostle interchangeably, but there is a distinction here.
Yes, there were lots of disciples of Jesus. We know there's more. There were 12 apostles. Then you deal with Judas, who kind of took himself out. Matthias in Acts 1, who they voted in, drew lots and voted in as a replacement because they believed there were 12, and then kind of Paul, who Jesus called to be that. So there's always the question, was Matthias a legit apostle or
Yeah.
not. I mean, we don't hear much about him. Consider, Paul certainly kind of came in and eclipsed that.
Yeah, no, that's good, and that's it's just interesting, right? And there's all these different I think technical this we see that even in the New Testament writings, like the writings that are going to be canonical, right? That find their way into the New Testament. They have certain qualifications. One of which is someone who knew Jesus,
right? An eyewitness of things, which is why Paul, we don't know what he saw of Jesus, but he saw him on the road to Damascus, so that makes him an eyewitness.
Yeah. And then again, we're not even in this, but to jump ship, even James, the brother of Jesus, who wasn't really a disciple, wasn't a follower of Christ until after his, Again, not to go on a tangent, but I also always find it fascinating that James never in his letter appeals to his family relationship. It's all just his apostleship and what he is learning there. So anyway, so we get a list here. Simon, whom Jesus named Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, another James, Simon. What do we know about these guys?
Well, we know this was a nightmare small group. This is what we know. This is the small group no one really wants to deal with because they're so vastly different. And again, we know them more by their brokenness than by their successes. Yes. And Simon, he's always put his foot in his mouth, always talking, probably just always seem to be out there. And you've got the same with, James and John, the sons of thunder. Mm-hmm. And, how do you get that name? But that they were probably out there, they're they're act before you think, shoot before you aim kind of people. And, Jesus in the process of changing them, they become, John, who is the son of thunder, becomes the apostle of love, and so Jesus is transforming them. But then you've got, down at the end, you've got, Simon the Zealot, and the Zealots were basically, it was really a political party, a political movement who was doing everything to overthrow the Roman government. Radical way, not just kind of we'll vote you. I mean, they were violence and trying to do things, who are doing everything they can to overthrow the Roman government. And then you have Levi, the tax collector, Matthew, who has sold his soul in the past. And I'm sure many of these guys had been ripped off by Matthew.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and that, they have been grumbling and complaining, Matthew's taken my money, Matthew's overtaxed me, so obviously there's a repentance and movement probably on Matthew's life, but it's still not this is who they were. And I don't know if you take everything out of that person immediately. So you've got two people, and I say it's two diametrically opposed people on the political spectrum.
What's that like?
Well, it's like our world now.
Yeah.
I think this is, it's hard. We all, this is just a challenging time. Yeah. There are, in any political thing, there are people who are really grieving and mourning a lot. This is really heavy and weighty, and other people who are cheering and applauding, and sometimes we're not sensitive to each other at either time about what the issues are. And, it just, how did they do it? It's they focused on Jesus and the mission, right? The mission is what is important. And, God, the political people don't have the power. It's God always has the power. It's God that works through them. And so, we just have to pray and seek him together. And I think, that's my prayer. This is going to be a challenging season. I mean, I think there's lots of turmoil potentially in the next few weeks ahead as people try to sort out what really happened with the election, what's right, wrong. People are going to be on either side. And, somehow we just have to keep Jesus at the center. We're here to serve him and serve a greater king, and trust and pray for truth and righteousness to be there, and that God's going to work out what he's going to work.
Yeah, and these guys, right, they have ever-changing, ever-evolving understandings of what Jesus is up to.
Yes.
And how he's going to accomplish that. Like some of these think he's going to be this political leader that comes in and
is going to do that.
Rome
That exactly takes everything away, which I'm assuming is why Simon was there.
He's like, yeah, sign me up.
Yeah, like this is the way you can do miracles, Jesus. Like,
yes.
You're going to blow them up.
Yeah. And I think and we see that in John 17. So later in his ministry, we have we're privy to all of these like intimate conversations that Jesus has with his followers, but he prays like a prayer of unity.
Right.
And even describes it like, hey, the world is going to know, right, essentially who I am by the way that you love one another. And so even in their differences, even in their probably even disagreements in their pasts, like Jesus is uniting them in his mission.
I always say this is a way aside, but I was studying this morning Philippians 4, where Paul writes, whatever is true, noble, praiseworthy, lovely. And he says, whatever is lovely, like think on these things. And, when I think lovely, I think of a nice flower, I think of a sunset, something kind of anemic and it's pretty. But I was doing the word lovely is the word proskunia is kind of proceeds to love, that pushes us to love. And it's anything that pushes us to love God and love people more. That those are the thing. It's not just think sweet thoughts.
Oh, that thing's beautiful.
It's what is it that pushes you to love? And I think sometimes this is a season, to stay off social media, to stay up, I've watched less news. I just can't turn it. It doesn't do my heart good to turn it on. I'm like, it's just not gonna do. I get enough to kind of be aware. But what is it that pushes it? And I think, where did Paul get? I'm sure they got it from these guys. Like, how did they do it? And she's like, think of the things that are going to push you towards love.
Yeah, no, that's so good. Love. And Jesus, with he's up to something here with these 12 that he has picked. I do wonder. I think there's different ways to describe what Jesus is trying to do with his earthly ministry, and I think one of the things that he is doing is he's trying to cast a new vision for what a renewed humanity is. Right. I wonder, is there there's 12? He's chosen 12. Right? Like, is there significance in that number?
Yeah, I mean, the 12 is kind of the number of the tribes of Israel, and it's, Paul writes in Ephesians that the church is built on the pillars, of the apostles. So I think as Israel was built on the pillars of the 12 tribes, the church is built on those pillars that God's grafting the church in as kind of the new Israel for the time. And so I think it is kind of a movement and a replacement and see God do that. But you see, I mean, this is what he calls all of us to. Like, it's not just the 12. He calls all of us to be disciples who are making disciples. That's why I love that it was baptism weekend, when we kind of were talking about this passion. And some of these, people, children, but these guys, young guys that we baptized this weekend, like, this is the movement. And, the genius of Jesus to pour himself into these 12 who are going to change the world. I mean, Peter ends up going to Rome. John goes to Turkey. Thomas, tradition says, goes to India.
Right.
And Matthew writes the first gospel, leaves us this legacy, but he ends up in Africa. So the whole known world, the gospel is expanding and Christianity is changing because of just changed ordinary lives who are pursuing the King and saying, I'm following Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus, I'm following.
Yeah, it gives almost new meaning to what, even in Genesis 1 and then 2, when God is, giving the creational mandate to Adam and Eve of be fruitful and multiply, like
fill the earth and subdue it.
Yeah, there's procreation, there, but it's more multiply and fill the earth with God's character and essentially the kingdom of heaven. That's so good. I did want to ask one other thing before we get into kind of a teaser for next week, and it's this: what do you think, like, these guys, like, when Jesus gives the invitation, what's going on in their mind? Yeah,
that's a great question. I mean, I think A few years ago, there was, the History Channel showed kind of the Bible from Genesis to to Jesus, basically, in the resurrection. And they portrayed Peter as Peter's calling and Jesus in the boat. And he says, their translation, come and follow me, is come and change the world. Join me in it, I'm going to change the world. And I think somehow this is what they saw. They saw that Jesus was someone, there was a movement. It was so countercultural, so different. And I think this is what, we're, to look at this coming week, sometimes we want Jesus to just help us get somewhere. Our salvation's not in Jesus. Our salvation's in our job. Our salvation's in a relationship. Our salvation's in money. Our salvation's in our career. Our salvation's just, in fame. Our salvation's in being known on social media, whatever it is. And we want Jesus to help us get to our salvation, as opposed to like he's our salvation. This is what Jesus is going to say. Don't cut, so. I'm so excited about that.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Because I think we're just going to see Jesus in a moment. He's going to ask a question that's so penetrating to all of us. It's a question we all have to answer, and it's like, how do we see Jesus? And I think often, particularly in North America, we say, accept Jesus into your life, and you've got a new helper who's going to get you to where you want to go, as opposed to he is this complete source of our salvation.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And we've got, again, we have baptisms this weekend.
Yeah.
And it's always so cool to see the story of life change. Because that's what baptism is. It is a pledge of allegiance. It is a public proclamation. I am now following the way of Jesus. And for us, that's there. But baptism across the world, in some contexts, is the thing.
Yeah. And that's what I think, in our culture where Jesus is kind of being kicked out of the universities and Christianity, I think is becoming more maligned and, just more challenges and difficulties. When you see adults standing up and saying, I'm publicly saying I'm following Jesus, I'm getting wet for Jesus.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. It speaks. And that's the invitation to all come and change the world.
Yeah.
So I love, we've watched The Chosen, if you've seen it on the app, and they portray Levi, Matthew, and it's such a great characterization. It's how you would never, ever picture him. It's just kind of neat. So I'd encourage you, if you're looking for something to watch instead of social media and the news, The Chosen, just watch, particularly how they portray Levi. It's kind of fun.
Cool. Well, thank you, Terry, and thank you all for joining us for our deep dive for Knowing Jesus Week 10. Look forward to connecting with you again next week as we jump into Week 11. So, crazy. Catch you next time.
Take care.